Hi there. So today my video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking a bit more personally about my own life and some of my own experiences. This video will specifically be diving into my own experience with the queer community. A big portion of this video will be talking about the environment I grew up in and how that shaped my experience with this community growing up. I'll also be touching on how that environment shaped my early life and how that changed through adulthood. My own experience and perspective with this part of my life has evolved a lot over time. The reason I am choosing to talk about this story today is because it is very important to share these stories, especially with the state of the world right now. It is also worth mentioning that I will be referring to people who have helped me along this journey. For the sake of privacy, I will not be using any names. Now, before I get too far into this topic, I do want to throw out a content warning. This video will be going over the homophobia and transphobia that I not only experienced, but also participated in growing up through high school. A few slurs will be said to add context to this experience, but these slurs will only be said once and they will also be censored. I will also be touching on religion in this video, specifically my own Christian upbringing in the rural South. This section honestly deserves its own video, but for the sake of context and background information, it's relevant to this video too. As for the intended audience of this video, it's open to anyone, but it's mainly aimed at people who are willing to challenge their own perspectives. If you're still someone who still struggles to understand this community, maybe I can help shed some light on that. Maybe this video will help provide some clarity. And if you're here just because you're interested in hearing my story and what I have to say, then thank you and welcome. Now let's talk about my experience growing up, what my background was like, and how the environment I grew up in taught me how to be homophobic and transphobic. So for those who don't know, I was born and raised in rural West Tennessee. Now when I say rural, I mean rural. I'm talking about a place where their county seat has less than 1,000 people. There are two things you can do in this area for fun. You can go to church, or you can drive to the next closest city and go to church. The point is, there's a very limited amount of things you can do here, and there's a limited number of people in the area. Now, because of that, it kind of constrains the flow of ideas in the area. So a lot of the world and the things that you can learn is locked away from you in bigger cities such as Nashville. This does tend to limit the overall perspective of the area, and trust me, I can say that as someone who grew up in this area and moved away growing up as an adult. The change is pretty stark, and the differences are pretty stark. Growing up in this environment was very limiting to my worldview, and it wasn't something that I really started to understand until I moved out and moved to a bigger city and started to learn new things and kind of experience the world outside of the small area that I grew up in. A lot of the worldview in this area is largely shaped by a person's family and typically religion. In the rural South, where I grew up specifically, that would be Christianity. Now there's all kinds of flavors of Christianity, but typically it was the Protestant church. Unfortunately, a lot of this worldview shaped by Christian upbringing tended to also include a lot of Christian hate. My first experience with homophobia was actually in middle school. It was socially acceptable to use the word gay as an insult. Oftentimes the thing being insulted was fairly mundane and pretty meaningless. One example that comes to my mind was some kids in my school saying that it was gay to like the color green. I don't know where exactly that originated from. I think it has something to do with the Green Day Packers, perhaps. I kind of digress, but the connection here is still sort of a mystery to me. The misappropriation of the word gay continued well into high school. The word gay was often used in place of other words like bad or stupid or that's not very cool. It kind of had a meaning of like, why do you like that? That's kind of weird. Being in middle school and high school where you're surrounded by friends who will make fun of you at the drop of a hat using these kind of words, you kind of start to pick up on it on yourself for self-defense to kind of fit in. And that's really the heart of it. It was not necessarily out of malice out of my own heart. It was more so an effort to fit in and to not be bullied by my friends at the time. I also remember feeling very insecure about being gay, and that thought process was instilled in me at a very young age. And also the idea in certain Christian circles that being gay is a sinful choice and that it's bad and you're going to hell for being gay. Couple those two things together and you kind of have a perfect storm for oh, I don't like this. I'm going to avoid this at all costs. Now, remember, I'm talking about children here. We were kids. I was 8 or 9 at the youngest I can remember and through high school. So this is like the formative years of your life, right? And you're subjected to all of this hate propaganda to be a certain way. And it's terrible. The word entered my vocabulary around this time too, and it was a word that the people around me was also using quite regularly, as well as people using it online. Now, interestingly enough, it was around this time that I actually made my first openly gay friend in high school. He was in the band just like I was, and I never had any issues with him. He was a pretty cool guy, and I liked talking to him. A lot of the misconceptions that I held at the time virtually disappeared just by talking to this person. They were just a normal person, like anyone else. We were all in high school just trying to pass our classes and do our tests and go to band rehearsal. We were just living our lives. Now, one of the big misconceptions that I held on to for a while, even through high school for the most part, was that being gay was a choice and wasn't some more complicated part of a person that isn't a choice, but it's more so just part of who they are. It turns out that this person that I was talking to would be the beginning of this journey that I've been on all the way through today. So one day I was sitting at a table eating lunch in high school, just minding my own business. The band kids typically had our own table, and occasionally we would have the same lunch periods. And at some point there was a discussion between some band kids about whether or not being gay is a choice. Now, my input at the time, given the environment I grew up in and my background information and kind of what I was told growing up without having no exposure to this community at all, was that being gay was a choice. And I stood by that firmly. That was like one of those hills that I was choosing to die on. It led to conversation, as productive as that can be among people in high school. One of the first things they did actually was ask me about my sexual orientation. Now, up until this point, I've never really thought about it. I was told that, since being gay is a choice and that it's bad to be gay, you like the opposite sex. And that's how it's supposed to be, that's how God intended, kind of thing. At the time, I was like, okay, I'm straight. I like women, I'm a guy, and that's kind of how it's supposed to be. So that's where I was at the time. Now, with all of that in mind, I did tell the person that I was straight, and that led to the next question. And the question was, did you choose to be straight? And to be honest, I remember just sitting there. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know exactly what to say, but all I do remember is that it made me think. Sure, up until that point, I was taught that this is how I'm supposed to be, but I knew deep down that I didn't necessarily choose to be straight. I just was. Spoiler alert, I'm not straight. In case you couldn't tell. But yeah, those 3 words kept repeating in my head. I just was. Now, of course, this wasn't something that immediate aha moment light bulb situation, but it did set the precedent that I would begin to think and ask questions and kind of explore myself and who I am. And of course, the next question in my head, logically, was, well, if I didn't choose to be straight, they didn't choose to be gay, right? And it's kind of funny, and it seems silly and trivial to say these things now, given how far I've come from this point in my life. That one question shattered the illusion, and it made me think. And one thing that I know about myself to this day is I have not stopped thinking ever since. So fast forward in my life, and now I'm in college and going through the motions, learning new things, meeting new people, and deconstructing the worldview that I had built growing up. It was around this time, the beginning of college, after the end of high school, that I fell out of the alt-right pipeline, which I had fallen into for a couple of years. I ended up moving to a slightly larger college town. You can have more exposure to different things that you may not have seen growing up in a city with a population of just a couple thousand people. This process was quite transformative for me, and it was a process that continued for around 6 years, from the beginning of college when I was 17, 18, all the way through grad school by the time around the age of 24, 25. It was also around this time that I started falling into Bernie Sanders, and I started watching him and learning more about, at least from my perspective at the time, more leftist ideology. This helped me continue to challenge the world as I saw it, and it helped me grow as a person and learn the faults that I had. Now, graduate school could have its own video on its own because of what I experienced there. But I started graduate school the summer of 2020. COVID was destroying the planet, at least humans on the planet. Yeah, it was pretty rough starting grad school with all the restrictions on being in class in person, and I moved to a new city for grad school. I had new roommates, new area, new school. Did not know any of my classmates too well, maybe a couple here and there, but the social isolation was very intense. When I wasn't in class or at work, I was in my room. And majority of the time, being in class or in work was in my room. Not only was I attending classes online over the computer, but a lot of the time I was working from home because I was doing, grad school work and stuff like that. I was lonely, I was isolated, and I was having a hard time coping with what was going on in the world, at the same time grappling this very difficult graduate school curriculum that I was getting myself into. Since everyone was talking online, Discord became kind of my home base. I was meeting people and talking to people online from all across the world, not just within the United States, but I was making friends in Europe, in the UK, even in parts of the Middle East, and I was hearing about people's experiences with COVID in other parts of the world and how similar it was to the experiences we were having. Now, up until this point, into my early 20s, my experience with the trans community was very limited. It just wasn't really something that was talked about with people that I had in my life that were very close to me, and my exposure because of that was very limited. A lot of the exposure I had came from online resources, which oftentimes included very transphobic, very hateful, coming from a point of fear and misunderstanding instead of understanding and love. It was almost always a gross misunderstanding of what it meant to be trans. And because of that, my knowledge base around this community was very limited, and I didn't know much about it. The word would pop up from time to time, and this was a word that I kind of heard growing up as well and saw kind of like in the media. If you go back to some like older movies, mostly late 90s, I want to say, don't quote me on that. And it was something that I saw growing up even as a kid, and a lot of it was also rooted in homophobia too. No, it's just very hateful and just total lack of understanding. This all changed when one of the people I was talking to online through Discord told me that they were trans. And I started talking to this person and getting to know this person, and we had a great time talking. By this point, she was well into her transition. She had already socially transitioned, and she was already starting HRT, and I got to talk to her about that and that experience and what that was like for her. But I would say more importantly than that, and again, this is coming from a perspective from somebody who had no exposure to the trans community other than just hateful, terrible things that you could read online. Interacting with this person, talking to her and learning from her about what her experience was like. It was at this point that I'm like, okay, she's just another person struggling in this world. COVID is wreaking havoc on us, and she's over here trying to figure out how she's going to sort her life out while all this is happening, just like me. We leaned on each other a lot at the time, and we even became very close with one another. Eventually, we figured out how to get through the COVID restrictions, and she actually came over to the US for a couple of weeks to hang out with me, and I was living in Alabama at the time. My entire perspective had changed, and I was growing as a person. Okay, so if you're still watching, you're mostly caught up to where I am today. Of course, it's nearly impossible to condense 20 some odd years of my life into a single video. Regardless, this should give you a pretty good rundown of where I've been in my life and where I've gotten to so far. Speaking of where I'm at today, I am a loud and proud ally. I have been for a good chunk of my adult life at this point, and I continue to do so going forward no matter what happens. But even more than that, I've found myself being part of the very community that I've been trying to learn how to defend my entire life. So for those who don't know, and you're still watching this video, it turns out that I'm bi. I've been exploring that a little bit, and that's kind of what I've discovered about myself. But more than that, turns out I'm also trans. I've been kind of deconstructing that a little bit more in my personal life, and I don't know exactly what that's going to look like for me, but it is a process that I've started. It's a journey that I'm on, and I'm going to see where it takes me. Keep that in mind as you watch my videos, I suppose. You'll probably see some changes over time. As far as my gender goes, I'm pretty comfortable saying that I'm non-binary, in the grand scheme of things. But again, we'll see kind of how that goes over time. As you can tell, I've grown out my hair. I love my hair. I need to do a little bit of upkeep with it. But other than that, I like where I've gotten my hair. I've been painting my nails, so you can see my nails are painted blue right now. That's kind of the color I've been using lately, just to play around and experiment with painting my nails. People that know me, I started with just my thumb, but I really liked it, so I'm doing all of my fingers and my toes too. I put that pride flag up to indicate that, hey, this is a place where everyone is welcome here. Even the flag even says that. Everyone is welcome here. The fact that that's a controversial thing to say is insane, okay? Absolutely insane. Everyone's welcome here. If you're watching this video, thank you. I'm glad that you're still watching. But I would say more importantly than anything, people's rights are under attack right now. Specifically in the trans community. They're the community that is actively being attacked the most by legislation. In the state I'm currently recording this video in, Texas has the most anti-trans bills trying to be passed or have already passed in any other state in the country. That's why I'm using my voice to speak out against what's going on and to let people know that there is community out there. Solidarity with one another is very important right now. And I want this to be a place where people can do that together. I know that making this video only pushes the needle even barely, if at all. But if one person questions their positions, if one person asks that question, then it was worth every bit of work that went into it. You're not alone, and there are people out there fighting for you. But more importantly than that, we should all be fighting for ourselves too. Hopefully this video has done a good job at conveying my evolution over time and kind of where I've gotten to and where I've come from and how that's kind of all tied together in the grand scheme of my life. The world can definitely be a scary place, but it doesn't have to be. This is my way of saying that.